computer. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good part of day, depending where you are. Everyone, welcome to the largest, fastest growing, and the most active large-scale Scrum community. Originated in New York City back into 2015 and now has gone viral. We have a special treat today. We have two special guests today, Chad Beer and Jeff Buballs. They are both very experienced and I would say well-known in the industry names. They are both professional Scrum trainers with Scrum.org, a very reputable organization that stands behind Scrum teaching and coaching. They have done a bunch of work over the years, programming, management, product ownership, business ownership, Scrum mastering, definitely, and even no less importantly, professional training and coaching. They also are co-hosted and co-running the Mad City Agility and Central Wisconsin Agile. Those are the communities similar to ours. They also co-host the Agile Wire podcast, where they frequently speak, as well as invite industry leaders to speak. So needless to say, Chad and Jeff have a very seasoned, very deep systemic outlook on the industry, on adaptive environments, on product development, on agility overall. And in today's discussion, that will be covering a specific topic, which seems to be pretty interesting and very relevant to large-scale Scrum. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to the gentleman, and please take it away. My question to everyone in the queue, please keep your cameras once again on if you can, and mics off. And the gentlemen, Chad and Jeff, will be managing their time with respect to presenting as well as taking questions, okay? Thank you, thank you, Chad. Jeff, please.
Awesome.
Take it forward.
Thank you, Gene. All right. So, Jeff, I'm going to kick it over to you and see where you want to get started, and then we'll dive in.
So just first screen we have up, there's a QR code there. If you want to pull your phone up, you could. Those are all the links to a page where you can connect with us. The podcast. Chad also does these really fun, like Agile songs. He's like the Weird Al Yankovic of the Agile community. So if you ever seen them, there's like a whole long playlist out there, and they're really good, at least in my opinion. So, so yeah, you can go to that QR code, and then it has links to all that good stuff. Gene did a great job introducing us, so let's just dive right in, Chad. What do you think?
Yeah, let's get to it.
Okay. So our talk is shifting from frantic and stressful to focused and strategic product backlog refinement. And so I know this is a less meetup, but what we're going to talk about today works in single team Scrum. It works in multiple team Scrum. We've used these techniques on lots of different scenarios, lots of different product areas. And what we decided to do is organize this talk into things that you should try and things you should avoid. Kind of similar to Craig and Boss's books, where they've got those different sections inside of there where they kind of give you these different patterns to try and avoid. And so we kind of structured this talk very similar to that. All right, so let's get into it. The first area is intake. So what we're talking about there is when work comes into your product backlog. How does that happen? All right, so the first thing, avoid projects being added to your product backlog. Okay, try starting with impact and outcome during ideation. When projects get added in, you end up getting a lot of just fluff, things that aren't really needed. A lot of stakeholders, a lot of people requesting it, are adding things because they don't think they're ever going to be heard again. And so they're thinking about adding everything but the kitchen sink. And so there's a lot of things that aren't needed, and overproduction is waste, as well as, many other sources of waste. So try to avoid that by starting with the impact and the outcome that you're trying to get to, and think about the options that you have to deliver those outcomes and impacts.
All right. Next one, avoid trying to make everyone happy. We say this often with product owners we're working with. Your job isn't necessarily alignment or seeking alignment with your stakeholders. Your job really is stakeholder relationship building, because you have to say no, and you have to say not right now. Life and business is about trade-offs. And so, if you are seeking alignment in the way you manage all the demand coming into your product backlog, you will go crazy. You're gonna be in a stressful state. So instead, try thinking about what you're saying no to when you say yes. So trade-offs, right? Anytime some request comes in, don't feel like you have to say yes or maybe. Have a direct, confident conversation with your stakeholder or whoever the requester is, and then talk about the trade-offs. Talk about what is going to change on the current state of the ordered product backlog in comparison to this new request.
And this next one kind of tightly couples to what Chad was just talking about. So try or avoid starting to work on everything, right? Too often we say yes to everything, we start working on it all. But there's some common myths that are out there. And I don't blame leadership in different organizations, but these are common things that maybe they think or they feel or they just haven't even thought of. But the more you work on, the more you get done. That maybe is a thought that's out there in the world. That's false, right? The earlier you start something, the sooner it'll be done. False, right? If we have focused effort, we will be able to get things done quicker and in shorter periods of time. It's Little's law. It's been proven over and over again. And so we're just saying leverage that. And as product owners, if you're somebody out there who's in any kind of product space, the more you work on, the less strategic you actually are, the less levers you actually have on what you're going to provide value to. You're just getting a lot of stuff and throwing it on the wall and hoping something sticks. You're going to do it all very slowly. And so if you want your ordering decisions to matter and you want to be strategic, try working on less.
And that actually really goes along the lines of, just again, think about Scrum, one team and less. Your product backlog being a single ordered list is really a long-lived capacity limiter, right? It's limiting the WIP. It's making you work at the capacity that you have the number of people organized around, like that backlog definition. Very similar for everyone familiar with less, right? The more broad you go with your product definition, the more focus you have on your backlog, which brings, again, you're starting less work. You have less work in progress. So it's going to impact your cycle times positively. It's going to bring all the other values that come to focusing.
So this is hard, right? Because you're going to have to say no to more and more people. So try visualizing the intake and the things that are coming into your backlog to surface those trade-off decisions. Get help. Talk about the value props back and forth. All the things on your product backlog are assumed value, and you don't know what you don't know until you actually build it, right? But try to prove out some of those assumptions. Take more of an experimental mindset as you're doing this visualization to do the trade-offs and try to figure out where to go next with that. So it kind of gets back to this one, goes along with the chat. I'll just finish this one up and I'll let you jump into the next one. Rationalizing stakeholders' requests with users and customers' behaviors. Too often a stakeholder says, I think it should work this way, but they care about the outcome and now they're solutioning. And so if you maybe don't feel you should go that way, maybe the data points you in a different direction, maybe you have a gut feeling as a product person that we should go a different direction. Try to run an experiment to validate your assumptions or invalidate your assumptions. An example here, there was a client I was working with once, and they were about to make a multi-million-dollar decision to do this integration. And what we did is put a button out there and said, because they thought we needed to do it, all the stakeholders said, we need to do this thing. And we put a button out there that says, fill out your loan now. And no one clicked this button. And that was like going to be where the integration started on this path. And so all it was a button to nowhere that said, call your loan officer to learn more about these loans. And so what we learned in that 2 hours of development was we should not spend millions of dollars to build these integrations out. And so just these things, they might be great ideas that people come up with, but we still have to validate that our user base, our customers are going to behave in a certain way. And there's a lot of cheap ways to validate that.
And if you're looking for more information on that, you can check out the truth curve. If you didn't mention that, Jeff, but Look into that. It's something we talk about when we talk about UX, when we talk about experimentation mindset for product ownership. All right. I think we're at a summary here, right? Yep. On intake. We'll just pause for a second so you can take that in. Feel free to take a screenshot if you want. I'm sure we can get these slides out to people if that's something that everybody would like. Okay. All right. Product goals. Next section here. So avoid confusing your product goals with your product vision. We see this a lot when we walk into a team, organization, and we take a look at what they have in their product backlog for product goals. Sometimes they just don't change them very often, and they confuse the existence of their team or the purpose of their team with a product goal. The product vision is really why you exist, right? Why does this 8 people of humans organized around the, 8 people organized around this product backlog? What are you getting paid for? Why do you exist? What is your purpose? That's your vision. It doesn't change very often, right? Now, if we go to a try here, instead, when you're thinking about product goals, try thematic summaries of impact and outcome statements. This is what a product goal is intended to be. If you take a peek at the Scrum Guide, a product goal is a long-term objective. If it's a longer-term objective, and we know there's another goal in Scrum called sprint goal, it means it's longer than one sprint and likely less than a year. Because if your product goal is longer than a year, that doesn't seem very incremental in nature, right? So somewhere, right, more than a sprint, several weeks to a month, whatever your context is. But really try pulling those thematic summaries out of your backlog, and those become your product goals. And the real trick, or the real magic here, is, again, focusing on outcome and impact statements. We see way too many backlogs with product goals that are tasks at the end of the day. They're like a thing to do, like upgrade to the next version of this thing. Anytime you see a verb like update, remove, create, those build, are tasks that belong in your sprint backlog. They're not product goals. They're not the what and the why statement.
And so again, with product goals, avoid being everything to everyone. Sometimes you see these product goals and they're like a paragraph or more. And it's like they're trying to like say everything under the sun. It's like the whole entire point of a product goal is to give your team or teams focus, right? And something they can remember. This is why we're doing what we're doing over this intermediate goal, this next few sprints. All right. This is what we're trying to change, this user behavior. We're trying to impact this company metric, whatever it is. That's what we're trying to do. Okay. So try then creating focus for your team and stakeholders by getting these product goals. Then your sprint goals will turtle down from that. And then your product backlog items will turtle into that from a product owner standpoint, from an ordering. This is a great way to really have focus on outcome and impacts for the organization and not try to be everything to everybody and everything that you're doing.
All right, another quick summary for product goals. And hopefully, I wouldn't be surprised if there's somebody on, here today that you're not even using product goals, right? I mean, we encounter this stuff in the wild all the time. So, I mean, hopefully this is a nudge to consider how you can really set some longer term objectives for your team.
All right, hot topic item, right sizing. We fall into the camp nowadays where we don't think people need to story point things anymore. They don't need to size things that way. There's better ways. And so right sizing is what we mean by that. Getting things that are in a size that can be done within a sprint. And we had to think of sprints more as not as containers of risk, not so much feature containers or work containers. Okay, so we're going to dive into a little bit more about what that means. So when we're talking about right sizing, first thing to do is avoid tasks being PBIs. Chad kind of hit on this already with product goals, but we see the same thing with product backlog items. Do this testing, do this analysis, learn more about this code base, right? There's so many things, do this design that are just tasks for the outcome that you're trying to achieve, the problem you're trying to solve. So try to avoid that. Try to avoid putting tasks in your product backlog, leave those for your sprint backlog. Try crafting impact and outcome statements at the PBI level. and keeping those together, right? Like don't, I'm going to go right to the next one here, Jed.
Yep.
Avoid dividing value between multiple PBIs. Too often we see people slicing it down to that task level because they say we need to divide the value because we need to slice it thinner so we can fit it inside of a sprint. And we're just saying, don't do that. Think about it as a risk container. Think about what can we validate? What can we prove within this time box towards this outcome or this impact for the organization? A telltale sign that maybe you're doing this is if no one wants to come to your sprint review. If stakeholders are paying a lot of money for your sprints and they're not coming to your sprint reviews, you're probably slicing past the point of value and you're just showing them work in progress. And the other thing you'll get is if you do this, you may see your management and stakeholders giving you feedback on how to solution the product. So that you might call that micromanaging, but if all you show them is work in progress, what do you expect them to give you? Right? So if we show them different outputs, we show them actually impacts we're making, we're showing them done working product, that's going to change what they're giving us feedback on.
And there's a question from Matt in the chat, finding that often features are confused with outcomes. So any guidance on how to avoid that? Yes. So a feature typically will have much more of what language, quote unquote, what, meaning it's describing what you want to do, but you haven't captured the why. So every time you look at a product backlog item, ask, well, why am I doing this? Well, why am I doing this? Well, why am I doing this? And if you ask it 3 to 5 times, you'll typically get to the outcome statement. But you might have to really have some discipline to do that because sometimes, I don't know why, but it's just so much easier to jump to the solution, right? We like to solve problems as humans, and we jump to capturing the solution, the feature inside the backlog, and then we forget, wait a second, but why? And if you constrain everything by the feature solution, you're constraining the possibilities of solving the same problem, right? Or why statement in various ways, often cheaper ways, potentially. So that's why it's important. It sounds really like obvious advice, but asking why, we did this yesterday with a class, a product owner class. We dove into their real backlogs and we started popping them open. And every time we just followed the same pattern. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? And we'd get to the outcome statement.
And then they were struggling with like, well, how do I order this? And you look at it and you're like, I don't know, what does request 1852968 mean? And then or it's some solution. And you're like, why am I doing this? How do I order those things against each other? I don't know. But if you start putting the why inside of your titles, so much easier for product owners to order their backlog. So much easier to talk with your stakeholders about why you're making the decisions you're making inside of your backlog. Those are the hard decisions, right? Let the how, let the solution come out in sprint planning and let that all be discovered there. And you can have the details you need that come out of refinement, but keep that why like front and center, because that's the reason you're doing this thing. That's the reason for the investment.
So I'll restate that again, because this is so important and we see this all the time. That short description you see. So when you go out to the view, whatever tool you're using for backlog management, when you scan down the 20 items on your screen, that's the short description. That should be your outcome statement. If you have to click into each PBI to find the essence of it, you are doing way too much work. And in the cognitive capacity load to do that, it's wasteful. So just don't do that. Like put the why statement right in the list view. And I don't know, it'll be transformational. Anyone who's looking at your backlog like a stakeholder, it brings it to life for everyone. And it makes the conversations and the communication around it flow so much better, right? Everything becomes smooth. Okay. So we were on an avoid one here, Jeff, of dividing value. I think we kind of hit on this one in conversation as well, but avoiding slicing too thin just because you can't get it done in a sprint. This might be because of some weird incentives that are going on inside your organizational culture around not wanting to, carry items across sprints. Our advice is I'd rather see an item carry across a sprint and represent the reality that you didn't get it done than you divide it up so thin that it's not a piece of value. It's not an outcome. It's just a means to an end. It's really just WIP disguised as an increment. So I would embrace the fact that Scrum really requires you to have an increment every sprint, maybe multiple, and avoid playing the accounting game of, well, we don't want to carry items over, so we're just going to make these things so small.
So there was a question, can you get to an example about dividing past the point of value or slicing things too thin? What would be an example of that? An example could be, it's easy for us to think about like a task that would get divided up, and like that would be your product backlog item. And so I don't know, let's just say we're doing we're having some landscaping done in our house. Our product vision is that we want to sell our house in the next 3 months. Our sprint goal is we want to improve the curb appeal for during this next sprint. Okay. A product backlog item is probably, we need to do the shrubs in front of the house. We need to update those. We need the mulch bed that's out in front. We need to update that as well. We need to plant a new tree, and we need to, I don't know, we could add some more in here, right? Now, if you go into the shrubs and I say, that's too much to get done in a day or an hour or whatever it means, and I say, I'm going to dig a hole. That's going to be my product backlog item. That's a task. That's the thing you do to get the shrub in the ground. I care about as the owner that I want the shrubs in the ground, so I have the curb appeal in that front area, right? So that's just work in progress. I don't care about how you went and got the shovels, or maybe how you had to gas up the lawnmower, or the any other equipment that you had. Those are all things you have to do. Don't tell me about those. Tell me about the outcomes. Tell me about what you're increasing by what you're doing and what the difference you're making. Those would be the things that I'm looking for. The other thing, go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say, imagine the risk avoidance, because you might be thinking, well, why does it matter? If we dig all the holes in one day and then as a landscaping team come back and then mulch and plant all the shrubs, why does it matter? Why can't we just do that over 3 days in that order? Well, here's why. Imagine after the 3 days, the mulch goes in and it goes across the whole front of the house. And then me, like sprint review, I'm the stakeholder, and I come in and I say, oh, that's not the right style of mulch. You're going to have to rip all that mulch out, right? But, and I know this is not a software example, but just you run with me here. Imagine on day 1, they plant one shrub, thin slice, they mulch that area, and then they go home for the day. I'm going to inspect what happened and immediately catch the fact that that mulch is the wrong mulch. And now it's less work, it's less rework to catch that. This is what Scrum exists for, right? Incremental iterative delivery, inspect and adapt cycles, so we avoid going the wrong path, we avoid risk. So it does matter thin slicing effectively. And so that's one way to think about it. Are you just digging holes, or are you providing some piece of value increment every single sprint? Okay. Moving on, Jeff.
Yeah. So a lot of times the reason why people slice things so thin, or what they tell us, is they can't get it done in that time box. But oftentimes what we see in conjunction to that is that people are working on very disparate items. They're not working as a team. They're not teaming as a verb, right? And so try working at an item, an outcome, or an impact to the organization as a whole entire team. Like you're one basketball team working on that common goal of winning the game, not like a golf team where everybody goes out and shoots their own round of golf and we hope we end up winning at the end of the day, right? So that's really what we're after, is we want people to be working together towards that common goal. All right. So avoid using product backlog as a time tracking tool or accounting system. Too often we see organizations that like they want to make a change to the system, to the way the teams work, to something, and they can't, because that's how the finances are figured out for the team, because they look at the product backlog management tool. Please don't do that. Like that totally is going to restrain how you can improve into the future if you add those constraints. Also, that's not the intent of the product backlog. It's not a time tracking tool. It's a tool to give us transparency into things that we're going to do into the future. It's the things we assumed are valuable that we're going to work on in the future, and it helps us to set some expectations of what those things are. It's not for tracking our time. It has nothing to do with that. And so if you try to use this thing for something that it's not, you kind of lose the entire purpose of what the product backlog is intended for.
If this is happening in your team or organization, you might hear phrases like, but I didn't get credit for that PBI. If you ever hear I didn't get credit for something, you're treating your backlog management tool as an accounting system. And there's a lot of funny behaviors that unfold because of that.
There was one team that took this to extreme that we ran into, and they did about 250 product backlog items every 2-week sprint. And what happened was they got credit for those things. It was like a time tracking tool. And so, I mean, it was like things like as simple as like go to the bathroom in the middle of the day were like, product backlog items. Like, it was that bad. It was, I mean, not that bad. I'm joking, but like it was close to that. It was every minor little thing. And so you're just spending so much time creating all those items to track all those items. And for what? It has no purpose. It doesn't help you at all.
Okay, so try another thing to try. Focus on the why and the what. We kind of said this earlier with goals. When refining, and leave the how for sprint planning. Again, we have to be disciplined to not let those tasks creep into our backlog. You can't manage that. It's so much to order the solutions and the detailed tasks. They do not belong in the product backlog. I mean, I know this seems obvious, but it's amazing how many backlogs we look at around the globe, and we continue to see tasks inside of them. And then it makes your life, again, title of our talk, stressful, because you've got to sift through all this detail. So really try to have discipline to keep why and what statements inside your backlog, product backlog, and save the how and the details until you get to sprint planning. Okay. All right. I think we're leaving the right sizing section here. Let's give you a moment to quickly absorb the summary. We'll keep moving.
Yes, we got a question.
Jolly?
Jolly? Yeah.
Yes. So you just said that keep the how for the planning. Isn't the how for the refinement?
No, So we're actually this is a good segue. We're going to move into the next module of this. The next section is called shared understanding. Refinement is really just refining items to get them to ready, really to a point where the people doing the work have shared understanding of what's required. It's a means to an end. If we could minimize refinement to zero, we would, because it's a wasteful activity, right? Requirements gathering is a wasteful activity. We don't want more of it. We want less of it. The only reason we do it is so we have clarity, so we can go build something of value add. So the how is the solution of what we're going to do once we pull an item into a sprint. Imagine if we start adding all the how details and kind of doing planning as part of refinement, and then something changes and there's 5 items at the top of our product backlog that all slide down to number 25 on the list. We've wasted that effort now. We may never get to those items for some reason, right? So you want to minimize just in time, and you don't add the details of what you're going to do to build and deliver the PBI until planning, because it may change, right? So you want your product backlog to be dynamic. If it's a very static list of 500 items, it's really probably more like a project requirements document in disguise.
Yeah, so we had a question. What does it mean that requirements are wasteful activity? So your customers will not pay you more money for more requirements, unless you're in some type of consulting gig where they actually pay you for a requirements doc, and then you're going to go build the thing for them. Maybe in that case, but like your customer that's actually going to use your product isn't going to pay you more for that. And so it doesn't add more value. It's like estimating. They're not going to pay you for more estimates. And so we want to do the minimal but sufficient amount, like just the least amount possible to still have shared understanding and be able to deliver value. And so we're looking at ways to optimize those things as we build product, right? So one way is to really focus on this is shared understanding. So Chad, did you want to jump in with anything else before we jumped into this one?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So avoid requirements handoffs with no conversation. The goal is not to create requirements. The goal is to create shared understanding. Requirements can be a visual that can help us to get to that point, but the goal is not the requirement. So when we have requirements, we should be having a conversation like, do we understand them? Do we know what they mean? What questions do you have? Like you're gonna accelerate that feedback loop. Like we've learned in product development, the more we accelerate the feedback loop, the more we learn. We want to do that same thing when we're figuring out what we need to do with the people that are going to do the work. So definitely just don't toss things over the wall.
So instead, you can use diverge merge cycles, right? This is very similar to any less guidance you get if you are in a scaling situation. You break apart, work in a workshop format, add details and refine the item, and then come back together potentially. Or maybe you can do a carousel where you just move around the room and you're transferring the knowledge around. Again, anything you can do with a large group of people to facilitate in a way where everyone is engaged, but then we come back together and sync. And you do these diverge merge cycles. And you can do this virtually with Zoom breakout rooms. You can do this in person in a workshop format.
Avoid just watching one person type on a screen and a bunch of people watching. Right? That's very wasteful. There's much more interactive, engaging ways to productively get these items refined and understood. So this kind of gets to our next one. Avoid a few people talking and the majority listening. Okay. Sometimes we walk in and it's just the product owner or the scrum master talking, and the people doing the work don't talk at all. And so we think you should shift the majority of the talk time to the people responsible for creating the product increment. And this is just good facilitation right here. Okay, increases engagement, gets a shared understanding faster, allows us to stop when we have shared understanding and we don't overdo and have overproduction of requirements gathering. So how might we do this? Try asking the question to the developers next time. You need to start this thing right now. Let's just pretend we're going to start this thing today. What do you need to know? Well, I would need to know this and that. Well, okay, I'll give you that information. Now, what else do you need to know? Well, this or that. Okay, you could start. Yeah, I guess I could start working on that part and this part, and we'd figure it out. Okay, good. That's enough, right? So those might be some prompts to help you get to that point of like, we are ready. We have enough information to start this thing. Just pretend it was the most important thing. We're going to pull it in right now. What would we need to know?
And for anybody who's been a business analyst in the past, where your job was to collect requirements and then come and bring them and communicate them, this can be hard. You really have to shift the way you interact on a Scrum team to take a facilitative approach. It is not about the thing you produce, right? I used to be a business analyst. I took pride in some 500-page business requirement specifications, but they don't mean anything if they can't be understood. So it's all about facilitating to shared understanding, not documenting and reading the requirements off like it's story time. So it's a big shift if you're coming from a different mindset.
Chad just nailed this one, right? Avoid the long-term detailed planning. That's what he's talking about, those 500-page business requirement documents. When have you, imagine something simpler, much simpler than product development, planning our weekends. Now, if I told you need to plan every single weekend for the next year, the next 52 weekends, how accurate do you think you're going to be? How accurate are you going to be in a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? I guarantee that last 6 months is not going to work out like you think it's going to be if you're going to plan every single detail of every weekend. There's too many things that you have to do, too many things that pop up, and it's just too hard to plan that far in the future. Now, product development is harder than that. And so just long-term detail planning is wasteful. Now, if we have more broad plans and we have forecasts on those things and we talk about outcomes and problems we want to solve in the long term, sure, we can have that. And we can change those things really quickly for the low transaction cost because there's going to be emergent problems. And I just think, doing product development takes a level of humility that we don't know enough to know what's going to happen a year from now. We're going to have problems to solve, but we don't know what those problems are yet. And so as we build things, we will learn the next thing to do.
All right. Another try stopping once the PBI is actionable or ready. This again gets to not adding details to the point where you're actually just planning when you should be refining, right? Imagine you stocking your pantry and your refrigerator with ingredients so that you can cook a meal. If you start mixing the dough to bake some cookies, let's say, the dough is just going to sit there and it's not going to be good a day later, right? So refinement is really stocking your refrigerator and having the ingredients in your pantry. You don't start cooking, you don't start working on it until you're in planning and ready to go. So the question is, do we have enough ingredients so that we know what we want to cook, what we want to go build, and then you stop, right? Again, this takes some discipline.
So there was a question in there that said, I'm hearing that solutioning is wasteful and we're trying to find just enough detail for what we need for shared understanding. It's not the solution. We have to figure out the solution and the approach. We're just saying do it just in time. The closer you can get to just in time, the better. Imagine you're in Chad's restaurant example and you start making orders before the people put them in. Now, maybe you can work that out if you're Little Caesars and you know, like the lunch rush is coming and you can start building some pizzas, right? But what happens when you overdo it on the pepperoni pizzas and you have a bunch of those sitting over and you got to throw them all away because they can't last all, dinner time? Or what happens if you don't have, but you go the other way. Imagine you don't have the vegetables cut up and ready to go and you don't have them ordered and you don't have them in the store. That's not ready to go. That's not ready to make a pizza yet. So now you have to go and do all that extra work to get that item done because you don't have it refined to the right level. So there's a just right level of refinement that we're talking about here. But the norm is that we go way too far into the how in most teams.
All right, Jeff, you want to hit the next one or keep moving?
Yeah, avoid fake spikes. Again, this could be a hot topic and we can dive in deep into this one, maybe another time, or it could be its whole talk if we wanted to. But if you have spikes every single sprint, you're probably doing them wrong. If you have spikes rarely, maybe they're okay, but spikes should be an experiment. Are we going to do A or B? Hey, should we use React or Angular? Should we go to Amazon or AWS, or should we use Azure? We need to decide. We're thinking about switching our cloud platforms. Let's look at the pricing models. We're going to time box that research. We're going to come back with a recommendation and we're going to make a decision to either do more research or to make that final decision. That's what we're doing here, right? It's not to go look into the code base and figure out how something works and figure out what the solution is going to be. That's often what we see. And that's just refinement, or that's the thing you would do in sprint planning or something else, right? So those are usually things that fit in other places inside of Scrum.
And then this last one in this section, we kind of hit on this earlier when we were talking about taking that facilitative stance. It sounds simple, but it's impactful. Use questions to surface understanding and then summarize it for clarity. So it would look something like this. Product owner, business, whoever's on the team, you ask a question about the product backlog item, and then someone else summarizes what they said to make sure everyone has shared understanding. You can do that over and over again. You can do this in any meeting. Have someone summarize what you think they heard, and you'll find that you get to alignment much quicker versus what we typically see is someone's talking and we never validate if the message was actually received properly. So do this over and over again when you're refining together. Okay. Quick flash of the summary slide here, Jeff. And just as I'm looking at the time, I just think we should keep moving. So we'll just let people, this will be on the recording at least. You can pause the screen to get the summaries. All right.
Let's keep moving into ordering. All right. So avoid changing your order only a few times a year, right? Healthy product backlogs are more emergent in nature and they change all the time. New things are discovered, new things are learned. If you're not learning in Scrum or when you're using any agile framework, I think you're doing it wrong. They are there to help you learn.
And when we say doing it wrong, It's not right or wrong necessarily, but you're missing out on so much benefit from the framework that's intended for you to get. So there's a huge opportunity for improvement, right? It could be that you're still in a project mindset in your organization and you're taking requirements documents and just putting them into a backlog. Whatever the reason, there's a huge opportunity. Okay, so next, avoid using calculations or processes as the only input to ordering decisions. The only caution here is if you're using something like WSGIF or some other multiple weighted factors, some numeric calculation, just don't just trust that that's the final order of your backlog. Like, use your brain as a product owner to make those final ordering decisions. Pretty straightforward advice, but maybe worth mentioning.
Okay. Confusing order with priority or categorization. Sometimes people use these words interchangeably, and they might say, well, this is a critical, this is a high, this is a medium, this is a low, and they put them into these buckets, and they think they have an ordered product backlog, but they have a priority. They have a priority, but what happens when I have 50 things that are critical? And that's my number one. Well, which one should I work on if I'm the developer? We're going to pull stuff in. Which one? I don't know. So that can be, you can use categories and priorities to narrow your backlog down to help you then refine and order in more detail. That's fine. That's a good starting point, but it's not complete yet. So we definitely need that. One of the great things about Scrum is the simplicity of it. It requires an ordered list of work to be done. Ordered, stacked, and ranked. That's what we're talking about.
All right, try using product goals and sprint goals to help reveal the order. I'll just go back to our silly example of product goal, long-term 3-month objective, sell my house. Sprint goal, freshen up the curb appeal. By just defining that up front, I've created some bounds to now think about my approach. If I am hiring the landscaping company, the developers, to do this, do I want to focus on the backyard first? No, because what's my purpose? I want to increase the curb appeal. So when my house goes on the market and someone drives by, they're like, wow, that looks really great. Well-maintained property. The back might be a nice to have. So maybe we'll get to it. But if we run out of time, maybe we don't, or we run out of money. So if you really start with the outcome you're trying to make, sometimes the order just naturally reveals itself. And you don't have to agonize over 25 to 50 disparate items in your product backlog.
Right. Avoid changing order during sprint planning. You can do it. There's nothing saying you can't as a product owner change your order in sprint planning. You get out of the sprint review, you learn some things, you've thought about it, you change it. Just know that that's disruptive. You've refined certain things. People are probably having their head, okay, I'm thinking about how we're going to do this. And if you make a big pivot there, it's a lot more for people to wrap their head around and to adjust to. And it just might take you longer because they aren't really ready for it yet. So something to avoid if you can.
And then just try sharing order with your stakeholders in refinement and in sprint reviews. Your backlog, if it's being made transparent, it doesn't mean that it's just accessible. It means you're talking about it all the time, because that's where you're going, right? We all like knowing where we're going. If we're in a car on a vacation, it's nice to look at Google Maps and see where our destination is, right? So anytime we have some sense of where we're going, it reduces anxiety in your stakeholders of just wondering, right? So inform them often in these touch points, in a sprint review event, or whenever you have a refinement session. All right, that's the ordering section. Flash the quick summary here. I think we were going to target ending around 5 minutes to the hour too, because I know this is more of a lunch and learn over the hour. So I think, Jeff, we got about 7 minutes left. I think we can still cover our final section. Yeah.
Yep. Let's cover that. And then if there's any extra time, we'll hit some questions we haven't addressed in the chat.
Yep. Sounds good. Okay.
Forecasting.
Yep. So, go ahead.
First one, avoid using averages and single dates on a calendar. And another thing to avoid, expert opinion, right? So what do we do instead of all these things? Well, forecast dates with confidence intervals using empirical data to build your forecast. So we're not using expert opinion. We're using data that's happened in the past to build our forecasts. We're not giving one date. We're giving multiple dates with confidence intervals. What that looks like is like, hey, we have an 85% of date A. We have a 50% of date B. We maybe have a 30% of date C. And we can go every 5%. There's tools that help you do this very easily. And at that point, you're putting the risk tolerance, you're having a conversation about that with your stakeholders, right? If they're funding you and you're saying, hey, we have this big government, or we have this contract and we need to hit this date by this time, or we don't get this $1 million kicker. And you're telling them, we have a 50-50 shot of hitting it. And if they don't do anything about it, they're taking the risk of 50-50 shot. And you're agreeing to that, I guess, as a group. But oftentimes we give the 50-50 date as like the best date or the date where we're being held to without knowing what our odds are. And we can track that date as we're making progress toward it and say, is the confidence level getting higher or lower with empirical data? As we build, we're going to get closer and closer to that date, and we're going to know, are we going to hit it or not? And we're going to be able to adjust. So the forecasting can be a very useful tool to help drive your plans as a product owner.
And I did see a comment or question earlier around estimates. So you might be wondering, like, well, do we have to estimate if we're taking an approach like this? And no, like we very rarely advise our clients to estimate anymore, because expert opinion, like we said, avoid that. What is expert opinion? Let's really think about it. You're asking a human being to predict the future to a single date, typically. I've never seen that ever work, ever, in my entire career, but yet we keep doing it. So we don't have to, because we're using a framework like Scrum and we have empirical evidence every single iteration. We can use data to drive our forecasts now. And the big change here is that dates don't have to be this scary emotional conversation anymore, right? Because they're emotional if it's expert opinion. Chad was wrong about predicting the future. No surprise. But instead, the data of once we've been underway in sprinting, is telling us that we're forecasted to be done within this date range. If you want to argue with the data, you can as a stakeholder, but it doesn't make any sense. You'd be detached from reality if you chose to do that, right? So this is huge. Like, if you are still doing estimates and expert opinion, we highly consider you to look into this. And I also saw somebody mentioned some of the Monte Carlo forecasting tools that you can use. Actionable Agile, I think, is the leader in the market right now. Does plugins with Jira, does plugins with Microsoft's tools. Yeah. And also Troy McGinnis has also done work where he's created some free spreadsheets you can use. So you could look that up on focusobjectives.net. So
yeah,
there's many out there.
It's on GitHub and Focus Objectives. If you search that, you'll find it. It's called Throughput Forecaster is the actual one you're looking for. Another thing here, avoid, doing your forecasting once and never updating it. That's also the problem. Like, we have data. It's like printing your map off from Google Map and driving down the car on this like cross-country road trip. And this is our forecast of when we're going to be there after, when we leave. It's what we do today. We have the ability to have Google Maps on our phone while we travel. We have the same ability in our forecasting for our products. And so use that. It totally changes the dynamic, the way you think about dates. When you do it real time, they don't become a hard conversation anymore. It's kind of like releasing used to be really hard for us, right? Because we only did it once a year. Now we do it every week. And so it's really not that hard. We've automated things. We've made it better. We made it easier. We're used to talking about these things. Just many things in life are like that. The more you do them, the easier they get. So talk about dates often. It'll make it much easier and help you to answer that question of when you're going to be done.
Yep. And this is what Jeff just said. So again, continuously updating and sharing those forecasts in sprint reviews, in refinement sessions, whenever you're with a stakeholder, you retrain the way people think about date conversations in your organization. If you do it often, people will look forward to seeing how the forecast has changed instead of getting a whip out and, hey, why didn't we do this, development team? Like, what's wrong, right? Everyone gets angry when we don't hit the single point date. So really try to increase the frequency at which you do this. We did mention this earlier too, long-term horizons. It's just, if you want to try to build a forecast, 1 year into the future, you can. If there's a legitimate reason, like your drop dead date is some legislative date or the Super Bowl, then fine, forecast to it. But if you're doing it just because somebody wants to see a year into the future, I think it's just, you're living in a fantasy land that you'll actually be anywhere near accurate. So I would really prefer, just try to favor short time horizons, not long time horizons. Only what you need for your business dates, not just because we want to know the future.
And the reason I like to use forecasting is to discuss optionality. So we have X capacity with these teams. We can do this much scope. Which scope can we get done? How confident are we? Here's the what if we only got this? What if we only got that? What if we only got this? And as we get closer, we can change those plans, or as new things come up that are more important, and now it changes our scope again. Like, what does that do? How does that impact things? We can take all your feedback, stakeholders. We can take it from the users, this customer, whatever it might be. But what does that do to our plan and our delivery? Is it worth delaying all of this to everybody for another month or two to do this feedback? You can have real conversations about ROI and the benefit of changes and options if you have these forecasts at your fingertips. And they really are easy to change and create. I mean, you can create multiple forecasts in minutes. The tools make it that easy.
All right. So quick summary on forecasts. Screenshot that if you want, or at least be there for the recording. But we're at questions here. Any other overarching questions or anything that we said that someone wants to have us clarify or hear more of? Or
Folks, take the opportunity and ask these. Chris.
So going back to the beginning, you talked about changing expectations and not saying yes to everything and helping the organization move towards it. What type of reactions should we expect from our stakeholders when we introduce this change?
They're probably not used to it. That's first off. So they're gonna be like, wait, you're actually gonna say no to me. But I think what you can do is say, this is a risk container, or let's try, what can we prove? How can we prove out that that's the right thing to do? And let's kind of devise an experiment together where we could prove this one way or another. We had these things called like 1 or 2 week sprints, and we're going to try something in a small time box. So like, why don't we try one thing, see if that works, and then we'll iterate into the future and figure out what the best path forward is. Like, build collaboration towards a problem with your stakeholders. Don't use it as something like we're now gonna butt heads going forward because I'm the product owner and I can say no to you, so I'm going to, right? We want to build bridges in everything that we're doing, build engagement and build relationships. Those are the things I'd be focusing on.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, anyone? Thank you for this, Chris. Anyone else, folks? We got maybe 2 minutes before we need to wrap this.
Yeah, Karen.
Hello. I was wondering, what has been your approach to stepping organizations to, less waterfall, more agile? Not all clients say, we want to jump into the deep end of the agile pool. So have you been the Sherpa for them?
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Every organization is quite different, but it does start with make the hidden visible. Try to visualize all the high levels of WIP in your organizations. If you're still doing projects, do it in the project portfolio. I used to be a project manager and a PMO spinning up Scrum and stealth mode. And we tried to kill as many projects as we could. Every month we met with the steering committee because we couldn't staff them, right? We were just starting more work and getting nowhere. So we kind of set off on this path to just reduce WIP. You can do the same with product backlogs. If you have 25 to 100 product backlogs, are those real products or are those team backlogs? So consider wherever the teams rely on each other, collapsing those into more broad product definitions. Start small. You don't have to do it all at once. If you can, it's great. But if you don't, look for those areas where you can amplify it in a parallel organization. And that once you start delivering results, it gets the attention of stakeholders. That's why I was doing things in stealth mode. When I started bringing live working product demos to a steering committee meeting with the C-suite, they were like, hey, can we do this for all of our projects? So if you show results in a small part of the organization, it gets people's attention, and then they're going to want it everywhere. That's, I don't know, best advice I can give in short amount of time frame here at the end of the hour.
Thank you both. I'll hold you to that. They're going to
All
want it
right.
everywhere.
Thank you for the question, Karen, and thanks for
You're
the
welcome.
answers. Folks, first of all, I want to give a very special shout out to both Chad and Jeff for doing this amazingly. It's actually such a powerful refresher to so many basic concepts that have been forgotten. So this is actually no questions at all. It seamlessly fits into the large scale Scrum discussions because, you know, without nailing it, how can we scale it? And anyway, right? So I want to thank you all. I want to thank you both for doing this, taking the hour and to come out and talk to us about this. For everyone else, I wish we had more time, but we don't. I want to thank you all for joining. It was a pretty high attendance, close to 90 people. And I shall have the recording from, I'll have the materials and the recording from both Jeff and Chad available sometime today, tomorrow, probably over the weekend. So please look up Jeff and Chad online. Also, I recommend looking into their courses. I think they're both very good resources to have on hand. They're professional Scrum trainers, and the foundational stuff that they covered, just scratch the surface. You can learn in depth with them. And let's do more with less with large scale Scrum. Jeff and Chad are also strong large scale Scrum advocates, just like myself. So hopefully we all enjoyed it. Thank you all for joining, and I guess we'll see each other very soon.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for having us.
Gene. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for asking questions. Yep. We'll stop the recording now and enjoy the rest of your Friday and the weekend. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome.
Bye.
Cool.
Thanks.